In this video I will first describe the primitive Earth and the development of its first atmosphere. I will then talk about the theories of how the first simple life forms evolved. Lastly, I will talk about the evolution that took place before the first plants and animals left the oceans and inhabited the land. The primitive Earth was a very inhospitable place with frequent asteroid impacts. There was no atmosphere and no solid crust yet. Eventually the Earth cooled enough to allow for a solid crust to form. There were still frequent asteroid impacts. There was extensive volcanic activity. Outgassing, the release of gas from inside the Earth, was common, allowing for an atmosphere to begin forming. Eventually enough gas had been released from inside the Earth for the evolution of Earth's first atmosphere. This atmosphere had no oxygen and no organisms had begun photosynthesizing yet. As a matter of fact, there were still no organisms on the Earth. Two scientists developed a theory to suggest how life could have begun on planet Earth. Stanley Miller and Harold Urey built an apparatus in the 1950s to show how this could have been possible. In this apparatus, we begin with simple elements present in the primitive Earth's atmosphere. In this case, hydrogen, methane, and ammonia gases are mixed with water vapor, also present on the Earth at the time. This mixture was then zapped with electricity, cooled and collected. The resulting solution contains simple organic compounds, the building blocks of living tissues. Many of you may be wondering where the electricity necessary for this process came from so long ago. You guessed it, lightning provides the spark necessary for this reaction to take place. The resulting simple organic compounds were first free to bond with one another and to form the first amino acids. Amino acids are the building blocks of life and make up proteins. At this point in the story, there is a bit of a puzzle as to what likely happened next. How do you go from organic compounds to a living cell? Under certain conditions, organic molecules can form tiny bubbles called protonoid microspheres. These are similar to cells in that they have selectively permeable membranes and methods of storing and releasing energy. The next unanswered question is how the first DNA molecule formed. Remember, DNA is necessary for the transfer of instructions from one generation to the next. There is evidence that under certain circumstances RNA assists DNA with replication. Also, RNA can even grow and replicate itself. These findings suggest that RNA may have evolved first and led to the first DNA molecule. The first evidence of primitive life is found in rock formations called stromatolites. These rocks have been dated at 3.5 billion years old. The bacteria diagrammed and pictured here are called archaebacteria. They likely evolved into the photosynthesizing bacteria who arrived nearly 1.3 billion years later. Nearly 2.2 billion years ago, there is fossil evidence of a photosynthetic bacteria called cyanobacteria. These organisms began to produce oxygen that would remain dissolved in the oceans and bubble to the surface and enter the atmosphere as atmospheric oxygen. There is evidence of atmospheric oxygen in rock formations 2.2 billion years old. These are called banded iron formations. The rusty color results when iron is exposed to atmospheric oxygen, same as today's rusty metals. All the organisms at this time were prokaryotes, very simple in structure. They had no membrane-bound nucleus, no membrane-bound organelles, and free-floating DNA. So how do we believe these single-celled organisms evolved into the ones with eukaryotic cells like the ones seen here? Eukaryotic cells have a nuclear membrane, DNA enclosed in a nucleus, and membrane-bound organelles. The endosymbiotic theory provides a good explanation of how this could have happened. A bacterium is engulfed by another and lives inside of it. The process begins with prokaryotic cells infolding their membranes to produce a nucleus with DNA. More infolding would allow the endoplasmic reticulum to form. Please take a few moments to read the text within the diagram. Next, other bacteria would be engulfed or taken in. These bacteria now had protection and could be used by the host for a variety of tasks. It's believed that aerobic bacteria could have evolved into mitochondria, and photosynthetic bacteria could have evolved into a plant cell's chloroplasts. Please take a few moments and read the text within this diagram. As it turns out, chloroplasts have their own DNA. Additionally, mitochondria have their own DNA, although mitochondrial DNA is found floating within the cell's cytoplasm. These two facts suggest that ancient bacteria with their own DNA could have been engulfed and led to eukaryotic mitochondria and chloroplasts. Later, with the enclosure of DNA in a nucleus, cells began reproducing sexually. This would allow for the shuffling and reshuffling of genes each generation and for rapid evolution to occur. Evolution during the Cambrian period has been termed the Cambrian explosion. A great diversity of animals appeared in the Cambrian seas. In addition to the appearance of a great variety of animals, an equally diverse group of plants began to appear in the oceans during the Cambrian period. During the Ordovician period, both plant and animal groups became more diverse within the oceans of the world. The appearance of life on land occurred in the Devonian period. It's likely that a sea creature with lungs and lobed fins simply walked out of the ocean and began to inhabit the land. The variety of both plant and animal life exploded as organisms began to become more adapted to their new environment. I hope you've enjoyed this description of how early life could have evolved as much as I've enjoyed telling it to you.